10 Minutes of Perfection in Breaking Bad. The episode in question that I'm talking about is that of Season 4, Episode 11, titled Crawl Space. The final 10 minutes in this episode are something that I sit within the show's all-time greatest moments. And it's at the time where we start from nothingness in the vast open land of a desert in New Mexico, and we finish at a point where it looks as though the trajectory of the White family is going to change forever, as Walter White was lying in the hole in his house. So I thought I'd break down the 3 scenes that make the final 10 minutes of the episode pure perfection. So let's get into it. Here are the 10 minutes of perfection in Breaking Bad broken down. Just to let you know, it goes without question this video contains spoilers. The first of the 3 scenes took place in the desert, and it opened up with us seeing Walter White with his head being contained underneath a sack to make him unaware of his surroundings. There were only 4 people present within this scene, and it didn't contain a single person that had any direct relation or somewhat compassion or humanistic nature towards Walter White. We had Walter, a henchman, Tyrus, who was fed up with Walter's disobedient behavior, and also Gus. The positioning of both Walter and the others with the sheer outnumbering set the tone, and allowed us to understand the lack of legs to stand on that Walt currently had. We were then given the moment where Gus arrived and pulled the sack off of Walt's head, to which, despite not seeing a point of view shot, we were fed what it was like to be underneath the sack in darkness, followed by the polar contrast of the harshness of the blistering sun, and the disorientating nature that it had on Walter's vision in that moment, showing once again that we were witnessing Walter's story and we suffer the pain that he does as a viewer. "You are done." 3 words that were spoken by Gus, which were met with a second of silence and a pause. This allowed us to wonder and question if this was going to be the moment that Walt was going to meet his fate. The 3 words could have meant a list of different things, but being fired was the one that Gus was referring to, lowering the tone and mood, making it seem like Walter had a way out, despite the fact that it wasn't what Gus originally wanted to do. He warned him off and told him to stay away from the laundry. This was when we saw Walter say, "Or else what?" following Gus asking him if he was listening. This was met with a moment of surprise from Gus, as it was something that he wasn't used to hearing, as his threats never usually fell on deaf ears. However, when Gus was speaking earlier on, we saw Walter looking around, and he looked at the henchmen, Tyrus and Gus, and saw that they weren't holding any weapons, which showed that he wasn't going to kill him, and he certainly couldn't kill him, as he would have done it already, cementing the leeway in the conversation that they were having, and making him believe that he was in a position to speak back. It was a small detail for them to include of Walter looking around like that, but it was the very thing that shaped and changed the direction of the conversation. As Walt was speaking about death and the idea of Gus killing him, we saw the darkness of the shadow of the cloud covering the entirety of the section of the desert that they were in, showing the darkness that was looming. However, once Walt started speaking about how Jesse was the thing that was keeping him alive, and that if Gus were to kill Walt it would mean that Jesse would stop cooking, it made Walt aware that he'd be able to survive, and as this happened, we saw the sun start shining again and creeping in, almost like it's a good situation for Walt, as he's almost untouchable. We then heard Gus say how he's going to deal with Hank, as Walter had originally promised to deal with the situation, however he failed to do so. And this was where Gus gave Walt a threat that would damage the very reason why he started getting into the entirety of this mess in the first place, his family. I thought when Gus was delivering the threat of killing Walt's wife Skyler, his son Walt Jr., and his infant daughter Holly, it showed a side to us that we've not seen. We've seen Gus do some unthinkable things in the past, but the very idea of him harming an infant showed the levels of evil that this character would go to in order to get what he wanted. Gus then walked off, and we saw Tyrus release the handcuffs around Walt's hands. This scene occurred with no weapons and only words that were spoken. No physical harm came to Walt, only mental manipulation, and it showed how good Gus was at it and that you don't need violence being carried out on screen to show the character in pain. This established the tone and direction that the closing few minutes were going to take. We saw something Walt valued more than his entire life being threatened. Before it was just him, and whilst he was scared he didn't respond in the way that he did following him leaving the desert. His family's his everything. What was great about what occurred as we entered the second scene was that we got a slight moment of comic relief. We had Huel discussing with Saul about what happened to Ted Beneke and that it was an act of God, seeing as though he slipped on the rug and was paralyzed. However, we then had Walt barging in with Saul saying, "How did you hear?" To which Walt replied, "Hear what?" not knowing at the time that the news that Saul held back from him when Walt barged into his office would be the very thing that caused him to have the extreme reaction that he had at the end. He knew nothing of the money that was given to Ted at this point, which made the revelation at the end even more powerful. We had Walt manically asking about the man who can make him and his family disappear and get new identities, which climaxed with the line by Walt saying Gus is going to murder my whole family. This was then when the whole thing started to build to a crescendo in words. The pacing of the words being spoken increased, the pacing from Walt walking around the office increased, and the volume also increased, showing the sense of urgency that was present. The words that closed this off were, "I've got the money," by Walt highlighting how his backup plan that he's always had in the back of his mind was able to be completed. We then got the moment where Walt didn't look like he was listening again, just like in the first scene where we saw many other things going around his head, and this time that was him wanting Saul to phone the DEA anonymously, and let them know that Hank was in danger, which we didn't see him take lightly to doing. But the line, "My brother-in-law doesn't deserve to die because of this," was something that held weight and was what changed Saul's mind, showing to us that even the people outside of Walt's immediate family were in danger and just how far his reach touched. The severity of the situation was something that started to hit him the moment that Saul agreed to do this, as from that moment on it should have all been plain sailing and there was a way out. Walt stated, "Just give me an hour," before his voice broke and he started tearing up when he mentioned how he needed to collect his family, showing the direct impact of his actions. This scene in its own right established a way out and made it feel like things were going to get better for Walt. However, what was being discussed at the start of the scene was something that was being laughed about and would prove to be the very thing that caused pain and chaos to Walt, which I thought was a great way of connecting part 2 and part 3. Finally, we entered the third and final scene. Music with a fast tempo started playing with a real beat behind it, and we also had Walt coughing, showing the risk to life that's ever so present within himself and now his family too. We saw him enter the familiar location where he usually kept all of his money, and the shot that was panning around showed the sheer amount of space that was surrounding him, symbolizing emptiness before he even started looking at the money. Only then did we see that he's not got the money to be able to complete his backup plan and save his family. The soundtrack behind him dropped slightly to a droning sound with a singular beat as Skyler entered when he asked where the money was, allowing suspense and tension to build as she looked down upon him from the dirt above. The droning sound then increased in volume until the point of him screaming at her, exclaiming, "Where's the money?" and then it just cut to complete silence. This was the crescendo of the episode. It peaked here. However, what was to follow supported it in a way that complemented a high that we didn't expect to hit only a matter of 5 minutes earlier. The panic and risk to life was something that was ever so present, and the close-up shot of Walt's face represented not only the hole that he was in physically, but the tightness of his surroundings honing in on him, and it almost being game over. It was so powerful. We then had the singular beat, which I feel represented the beating of a heart, as Skyler stated that she gave the money to Beneke to protect the family, showing that despite the fact that she got rid of the money, she was using it in the same way that Walt was planning on using it too. This was met with a harrowing scream as Walt questioned the very decision that she made. But he couldn't argue with her due to the fact that without even knowing what it was used for, there were intentions there. In these moments, Skyler had to match everything that Walter was emitting, and I feel as though it was done extraordinarily well, as there wasn't a moment that I thought lackluster at all. The singular kick was beating away in the background as Walt broke down into hysterics, crying and then laughing, sitting in the pit that was symbolizing his grave. But not only his, but also the family that he would be failing to protect. The drastic change from crying to laughing was haunting, and was something that I didn't expect. It showed the fact that when there's nothing more that you can only just laugh at the situation that you've got in. The ridiculous far away from his ordinary life that he once led, and now the situation that he found himself in. The phone then rang in the background, to which we heard Marie stating how it's not over and that they're going back to finish the job on Hank, which we know is what Walter asked Saul to do to inform them on, showing that even when he's trying to protect his family, the danger, fear and panic that he bestows upon them is always ever so present. Whilst this was happening, all we could hear was Walt laughing in his haunting way in the background, as we then cut back to the room that he was in, and the camera then zoomed out to Walt just lying there in the hole, which I feel represented a grave and the death that was on his mind, as even by the time that we'd zoomed out, there was no money left surrounding him, just dirt and the mess that he got himself into. The droning sound had raised itself in volume to the point where it was uncomfortable to listen to, which showed the uncomfortable nature of the situation that he was in, and that it felt like there was no way out. These 3 scenes were sheer perfection from Breaking Bad. In 10 minutes, we went from lying in the desert to ending up in a hole where Walt was acting like a maniac. It was a journey that occurred extremely quickly, but soon became some of the perfect moments in Breaking Bad. The camera work, the soundtrack, the performances by the cast members, and the drastic change in tone showed the severity of what was at stake and what it felt like for a man who was going to lose it all. It's 10 minutes that stick in my head and never fail to leave for all of the right reasons. So, there you have it. 10 minutes of perfection in Breaking Bad. If you want to see more videos on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, such as endings explained, theories and predictions, and character breakdowns, then click on the I button, or alternatively you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. If you want to give me a show or movie that you'd like me to review, then head over to my Twitter, @brainpilot_, and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What do you think is the best episode in Breaking Bad? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.